One of mine and many others' favorite Pixar movies, The Incredibles, was recently back in theaters for a 2-week run. Now I know this was kind of a while ago at this point, but, these videos do kind of take a while to make. Anyway, I went to go see it, and in rewatching it, it got me thinking about a few things about the greater universe that this movie is taking place in, and the implications of a world with actual superheroes living among ordinary citizens. Like, for example, how it's not actually made clear what causes an individual to have superpowers, or how common it actually is. Like, you would think that between both of the Incredibles movies, we would have seen at least one ordinary person with superpowers. But for some reason, the only supers that are shown in the original movie are the ones that are employed by the United States government as part of the National Supers Agency. And of course, any kids that those supers had, such as Violet, Dash, and Jack-Jack. And then in the sequel, there were a couple of wannabe supers, but other than that, there aren't really that many supers from the looks of things. According to the Incredibles bonus disc, there are only 21 supers enrolled in the official government program, and they weren't as evenly spread across the United States as you might think either. The opening is taking place in the fictional city of Municiberg. This city is implied to be located in California, right about where the Pixar studio is located. This is because they reference the street San Pablo Avenue.
Deadly high-speed pursuit between police and armed gunmen is underway traveling northbound on San Pablo Avenue,
which is actually a real street located right in front of Pixar. Mr. Incredible, Frozone, Elastigirl, and multiple others at the wedding are all in the same place at the same time. You would think that with such a limited number of official supers that they wouldn't all be concentrated in one area. You would think that if they were really that desperately needed that they wouldn't have time to make the wedding. I think there's more to the supers than we're being told. I believe that the purpose of the supers was more so to act as part of the military, rather than to take down low-profile criminals to improve civilian life, as you might be inclined to believe. This would explain why Elastigirl has connections to ex-military pilots and is trained in flying planes. Her skills are clearly the result of high-level training. You don't just get in a plane for the first time and know how to evade missiles. And although Mr. Incredible does stop a common thief at the beginning of the movie, I think it's more of something he does because of his own moral obligation rather than it being his job. Because this really is just part of his character. Like, even when he's working for InsureCare, you see him helping the old lady when he's really not supposed to be doing that. He's just someone with a strong moral compass. He isn't required to help people, only to do the job he was assigned, and every time he does step out of line and try to help someone, it usually doesn't end well for him. So why California, you might wonder? You have to keep in mind the time period that this is taking place in. This is in the late 1940s, right after the end of World War II. Many naval bases such as Pearl Harbor were located in the Pacific, so that's why they had a lot of supers located along the West Coast. And presumably just as many on the East Coast. That's why so many were able to make it to the wedding. In fact, it would make sense if the only reason for creating the Supers Agency in the first place was to aid in the battles of World War II. And now with the war over, there's little use for the Supers anymore. Now they've been reduced to fighting lower level threats such as Bon Voyage, which he's obviously a decent threat, but nothing compared to World War II. But the question still remains where the Supers actually got their powers. For the longest time, I assumed that they were given to them by the government as a genetic experiment. Because it does kinda just seem like the logical conclusion, considering that they're not given a backstory and there's not even so much as a hint dropped throughout the entire movie. But I've found new evidence to suggest that that's not the case at all. In a newspaper shown during the superhero protests, it says, "If it is the age of the super, then it is also the age of the victim, the innocent bystander, the law-abiding citizen who lives in constant fear of those more powerful than they." This is the part you want to pay attention to. Whatever forces granted them unique abilities that set them apart from the rest of normal society, it does not grant them the right to exercise those same abilities in the name of protecting others. Might does not make one right, regardless of intent. This surprisingly reveals that people actually don't know what caused the supers to have powers, considering the fact it says, whatever forces. At the very least, normal people don't know why the supers have powers. I'm sure the government does, or at least has an idea. So since the movie gives us no clear indicators, it's my job to figure out what's really going on here. And this requires us to look deeper into the interconnected Pixar universe, specifically Monsters, Inc. Because I've found out that the supers and the monsters actually have a lot in common. So much, in fact, that I actually believe that the supers are the monsters. If you're new to the Pixar theory, it's basically the idea that all Pixar movies are taking place in the same universe, and the events of one movie directly affect another. I'm not going to go too deep into the entire theory, I'll just show you some examples of how Monsters Inc. and The Incredibles are connected. A pretty solid connection is the fact that in Finding Nemo, we can see a kid reading an Incredibles comic book. So that links together Finding Nemo and The Incredibles. And another Easter egg is that during the credits, Mike Wazowski just straight up appears in the movie, which then connects Monsters Inc. to Finding Nemo, which means that these three movies are linked together. So that in itself should be solid evidence enough. But to prove my point further, Duke Kaboom from Toy Story 4 is in Incredibles 2. The Toy Story and Monsters Inc. franchises are some of the most heavily connected. Scream cans appear in both Toy Story 4 and in Lightyear. Not to mention that it was basically confirmed through comics that these universes are connected. I know you're probably like, what? I've never heard of this before. And it's kind of a long story that I'm not really going to get into right now, but basically about a decade ago, there was a comic book published that shows Sid breaking Waternoose out of jail, and basically they go on a rampage together across the monster world. But like I said, that's a story for another day. So now that I've shown that these two movies are taking place in the same universe, now I'll explain how the monster world has a deep connection to the supers. In Monsters Inc., we're introduced to a city of monsters with little information as to how their society actually started. We see that their world has no humans, but then it leaves you to wonder where the human world is in relation to the monster world. And how did they even discover the human world to begin with? But if you're like me and you've looked deeper into this, you've probably come across this bonus feature, the story of how the monster world came to be. And if you watch my channel, you'll know that I refer back to this very often. This bonus feature tells us that millions of years ago, there were two primitive tribes that had a fallout with each other. One of the tribes was scared off into the ocean. They swam until they found an enchanted island with magical fruit. I've previously theorized about this island being located in the Caribbean if you want to go check that out. Basically, the entire monster world is literally just Monstropolis, and it's all on one small Caribbean island. It's kind of a long theory, but I would definitely recommend it. This video isn't about the monsters though, it's about the supers. Anyway, when they ate the fruit, they turned into monsters. They then went on to form their own world separate from human society. What's interesting about this is that it means that the monsters are actually humans, and that the monster world is located on the same Earth that the human world is. So the monster world actually isn't its own world at all, it's the same world that we're living in. This is actually what's stated in the original Pixar theory, albeit for a different reason. In the original Pixar theory, it says that because of the radiation from By and Large, it caused the humans to mutate into monsters, meaning that Monsters Inc. is taking place centuries in the future. Personally, I don't really agree with this part of the theory, because it's made pretty clear through this short that monsters have been around since the days of cavemen. Monsters Inc. is actually taking place in the 90s according to Mike's scare files. Monsters aren't just big and scary creatures. Some of them actually have powers like the supers, and these magic fruits could have different effects on different people. Randall, for example, is able to make himself invisible just like Violet in The Incredibles. Most importantly though, it's shown through Luca that monsters are able to take on the appearance of humans, which makes sense because, again, they are human. Now, this is where you're going to want to pay attention. Jack from The Incredibles takes on many forms, but one of his powers is actually to turn into a monster, among many others, of course, many of which I've made connections to Pixar's most recent movie, Elemental. This proves, though, that the supers are actually just a subgroup of humans derived from the monsters in Monsters Inc. Jack in his monster form could easily pass for a monster from the monster world. In summary, long ago, there were two groups of cavemen, one known as the Mans and one known as the Mons. The Mans became more advanced and stronger than the Mons, and pushed them out to sea where they colonized an enchanted island that contained magic fruit. They ate the magic fruit and it turned them into monsters. Over many years, the monsters developed a city on this island called Monstropolis, and invented a method of teleportation that gave them instant access to anywhere in the world. Meanwhile, not all monsters stayed in Monstropolis. Some traveled up to Italy, some were banished from Monstropolis, and some even tried to be a part of human society. World War II broke out, and the government made use of these superhumans by creating the NSA, the National Supers Agency. Eventually, people were fed up with the supers, and they were made illegal. And this is how we get to where we are in The Incredibles. If you've enjoyed this theory, consider checking out my channel. I have a ton of other theories. Anyway, thanks for watching, and bye!